hands, okay? So those are the 3 W's. So the 3 W's kind of help you remember wear, wear, wait, and wash. Next slide, please. So this is basically a reminder to maintain your health. In Mecklenburg County, the community level is low. If you are at high risk with severe illness, talk to your healthcare professional or provider. Whether you need to wear a mask and take precautions. Now at the hospital, you do not have to enter the hospital with a mask on. However, we still have them available if you would like to do so. And we do ask you to do it as a precautionary. However, it is not mandated. Stay up to date with your COVID-19 vaccinations. If you need more information, I have more resources for you if you need information on vaccines. Get tested if you have symptoms. So before we listed a host of symptoms that could possibly relate to COVID-19, the best thing to do is to get tested. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not feeling well, I have a headache, I'm coughing, shortness of breath. It's probably my allergies, right? I had a friend, it's probably my allergies. Oh, it's my sinuses. The best thing to do is to get tested to make sure. Make sure that you know exactly what your symptoms are and you're talking to your health care provider because you may be treating something that has nothing to do with it. You may have COVID-19 or some other issues that you may need to contact your provider for. People may choose to wear a mask at any time. So it's not against policy for you to wear or not to wear a mask. So if you feel like you want to wear a mask, do so. I know I went out to a function, and out of everybody there, there was one person who wore a mask. And that person, people were looking like, why do they have a mask on? Why they got a mask on? Now, at this rate, you still have the right to wear your mask, and you are encouraged to do so if you are having symptoms, as well as just a safety precautionary, okay? People who have COVID-19 symptoms, receive a positive COVID-19 test, or have been exposed to someone with COVID-19 symptoms should wear a mask around others. So if somebody in your household is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19, that means you also need to wear your mask. Doesn't mean that you have it, but you could be exposed to it, so be careful about that. Sometimes people think family is okay to hang out with, or friends are okay. Still be cautious. Make sure you're maintaining your health at all times. So I'm here to discuss COVID-19. However, I am going to relate it to mental health. That leads me to post-pandemic stress. Has anybody ever heard of that? All right. So it's very mindful or to keep in mind that post-pandemic stress disorder is not a disorder that has made it to our manual. So it's not in our DSM-5. So it's not in our manual yet. That is something that you will not receive on some sort of assessment or evaluation. That is just lingo that's being used right now. Maybe it will be in our DSM-5, but right now it is not. But that jargon is being used, okay? Next slide, please. So when it relates, let's talk about our mental health, because I'm going to tie it into the COVID-19 and the post-pandemic stress. With mental health, it includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So all three, not just one. Mental health is all. Mental illness is a brain-based condition that affects your thinking, your emotions, and your behavior. There's no single cause for mental health illnesses. It's a combination of the way your brain is structured as well as the environment you grow up in, okay? So it doesn't mean that if you live at 123 Applesauce Lane that you're gonna have a mental health diagnosis. However, sometimes in your community or where you live in your environment, if you grew up in a household of trauma, sometimes you can have a mental health disorder along the lines of depression or anxiety. But it doesn't mean that your location or your house or your address or your zip code means that you're gonna have a mental health diagnosis. So I just wanna make sure, because I've had questions about that in the past. So how many people have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder? Next slide, please. All right. So post-traumatic stress disorder is something that's really, really popular, especially when it comes to the vets. A lot of people have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So before we get into post-pandemic stress disorder, I think it is good to go over post-traumatic stress disorder because it is similar. If you are not aware of what that means, I'm going to break down post-traumatic stress. So post means after, okay? Pre means before, post means after. Let's break down the word traumatic. So that means a high anxiety provoking event or situation. Then I'm going to break down stress. We all know what stress is. So stress can look like many forms, right? So then when it comes to disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a disruption of your functioning. Okay, so I'm going to go to this slide. Post-traumatic stress disorder stems from the more well-known, post-pandemic stress disorder stems from the more well-known post-traumatic stress disorder. An estimated 13 million Americans have been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. After experiencing a traumatic event, a person may have PTSD if stressful feelings around the traumatic experience persist for longer than 1 month. So that means something has happened, a traumatic event, or you've been exposed to some sort of trauma, and the symptoms are persisting more than 1 month. People of all ages can have PTSD. That doesn't mean people between 20 and 40, 40 and 50, 50 and 60 and up. It doesn't have an age because we all can be exposed to some sort of trauma. And in this case, we're talking about how COVID-19 has caused trauma. But right now, I just want to focus on post-traumatic stress, and then we'll relate the two. Some of the symptoms could be flashbacks, nightmares, avoiding similar situations, or being overly alert are common symptoms of PTSD. That means trouble sleeping, avoiding or isolating yourself, as well as being overly alert, easily startled, okay? Unlike post-pandemic stress disorder, PTSD is a diagnosable illness. So that is something that is in our DSM-5 that you can be diagnosed with versus post-pandemic stress disorder. That is something that you can't be diagnosed with as of now, but it's something that we're looking at and something that is real, okay? I'm going to go to the next slide. So let's talk about post-pandemic stress disorder. So we've already talked about post, meaning what? After. The pandemic, what was the pandemic? What happened in the pandemic? COVID-19, right? Did that stress us? Right? And so when we use the word disorder, was it a disruption in our functioning? Absolutely. All right. So COVID-19 has impacted the globe community in several ways. Not to be left out, mental health has also been affected. So I'm just kind of going to go over trauma resulting from multiple stressful pandemic-related experiences. Okay? So I'm going to go to the next slide. Signs and symptoms. These are very important when it comes to post-pandemic stress disorder. Fear and anxiety. What could the fear be? I don't want to leave my house. Do I hug you when I see you? Do I shake your hand? Do I just give you a nod? What do? I don't know. So the anxiety of also being, testing positive, correct? So that's the fear and anxiety. Reoccurring intrusive thoughts. That paranoia, is something going to happen? Am I safe? What about my livelihood? Social withdrawal, being isolated. When everything got locked down, were we isolated? Was it a choice? We were forced to because we were trying to maintain our health, correct? When it comes to social withdrawal, we can make a decision to stay isolated sometimes. So we can kind of stay at home, but in this case, we were forced to do so. So think about the psychological and the emotional aspects that were affected because we were forced to be in that lockdown. Sleep disturbances or sleep disorders Can anybody think about, was your sleeping pattern a little different around that time? Don't answer, but just think about, was your sleeping patterns different? Because a lot of times we had worry, we had that paranoia that it can affect us in our sleep. So post-pandemic stress. If you can't get any sleep, are you going to be stressed? Is your day going to be different? Your routine is going to be off. You might be a little bit more irritable. You might be angry. Your mood can definitely change. Changes in your eating habits. When you're stressed, can eating be something that you do to self-soothe? Is it effective? It might taste good for a little bit, but I'm not sure that it's going to be effective. A lot of times with the eating habits, you can, eat more than the average person or the average day because, you're stressed. Also, when you're at home, you have access to that kitchen. During that lockdown, did anybody see themselves eating a little more than usual? I know I did. I gained about some pounds, okay? Did y'all hear that? Yeah, so changes in your eating habit. When you're worried, when you're stressed, the pandemic definitely took a toll on us when it came to our eating and our sleeping patterns, our thoughts, our fears, and our anxiety. Feeling powerless. Did we have any control over the COVID-19 pandemic? It was out of our control. Out of our control. Can we go to the next slide, please? And when something is out of our control, can't we feel powerless? I know sometimes I can. Potential causes of some of the symptoms that we talked about is facing quarantine and isolation, fear of injection. So I know a lot of people had the fear of being, infected. A lot of people had a fear of being infected. I know my mom would not leave the house. She would only eat what she cooked. She didn't want to touch anything. When I came over, she made me strip down, Lysol down. I'm not sure if that was effective, but that was her way of keeping it in order the best way she knew how, right? But a lot of people did that. So fear of infection. Also, fear of job loss. During that time, how many people lost jobs? A lot, right? How many people's finances were affected by COVID-19 and the changes in the pandemic? Again, relating this back to post-pandemic stress disorder. We already talked about the lockdown and the isolation. Loss of social life. If you're used to going to work and having that one-on-one connection with your clients or your staff, you lost that. Well, some people lost that. Some people didn't. But a lot of people lost that. If you were used to going out to karaoke on Tuesdays, or coming to church for Bible study or choir practice, that stopped. That social interaction stopped. So what do? Post-pandemic stress disorder. Those are the effects of that. Our outlets were restricted or completely gone. Also, during that time, when there is a loss of activity, it can decrease your motivation. So now that the pandemic is over, as they say, which it is not, but they say that it is, and we're getting back to a routine, if you haven't been socializing for 2 years, is it going to be easy, or it may be hard for you to get back into that realm of being social, correct? All right, next slide, please. So also, with the impact of COVID-19 during the pandemic, it can be devastating and affecting Americans. For example, changes in diet and exercise. I've already told you about my some pounds that I gained, right? And exercise, for me, there wasn't any. I did have an opportunity to do it, but if you're used to getting up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym or having your swim class like my mom has, that was cut out. So that could affect your mental health, especially if that was a coping skill or an outlet for you. That just stopped. Access to medical care. A lot of people had to transition to virtual when you needed to be in there seeing your doctor face to face. We are glad that we kind of transitioned to virtual so you could have that outlet, and it was definitely helpful, but it wasn't what we were used to, right? Getting out to even get medications. If you're on weekly medication or monthly medication, even leaving the house, if you're on oxygen and being exposed, especially if you're high risk. the ability to manage stress. So stress was definitely hard around that time. I know for me, I would turn on the TV. What did I see? Information about COVID. I pick up the phone. Did you see this on the news? Did you hear about this? Went to work, same thing, you know? So in all aspects of my life, it was COVID 19, COVID 19, COVID 19. How can that not affect you in your mind and your brain and your emotions? So again, tying this back to post pandemic stress disorder and the ability to manage stress. If your outlets were to manage stress and getting out, taking a walk, interacting with your friends, that has all been affected. All right. Certain groups were identified to have a higher risk of developing post pandemic stress than others. Those previously diagnosed with a mental health and healthcare professionals are both groups that have been affected. So I want to say this that I learned during the pandemic. Some people had never experienced issues with coping or not being able to cope. Some people have never experienced depression. We had people coming into our office that were diagnosed with major depressive disorder, PTSD, all of those diagnoses that never experienced that before in their life. So we had an influx of people coming in to talk about their experience. Not only that, grief. We lost a lot of people during that time. So we had a lot of people coming in wanting to talk about grief and their situations at home. Next slide, please. So coping. We are encouraging you to socialize when possible. Of course, remember those three W's. What were the three W's? Good job. Wash, wear, and wait. Good job. Individual or group therapy. So we do have that at Behavioral Health. We have that at Atrium where you can get into individual and group therapy, as well as their other community providers. Fitness programs are a good one, and also support groups. Next slide. These are some of our community resources. You have the Behavioral Health Line, and I also have copies of these if you would like them. But we have the Behavioral Health Line. We also have community resources in the website. And I believe that is the Suicide and Crisis Hotline there, Crisis Text, and Mental Health America. Also, Mobile Crisis, as well as Crisis Solutions of North Carolina. Next slide, please. So what are the takeaways from today? Of course, we wanted to educate you on post-pandemic stress disorder. We wanted to remind you regarding the three W's, remind you also about your vaccines, making sure that, I know you guys are looking at that, I'm just talking right now, making sure that you're providing information to your mental health provider, you're having those conversations, you're staying safe, you're being mindful about your health. Also, the education that we're going over today, participating in hobbies, socialize, increase your physical activity, and also manage the effects of stress. Again, we have talked about ways to do that, and one is through therapy and also support groups and things that we have at Atrium Health. And we also have additional information, and I have takeaways, handouts if you would like them. Next slide, please. So this is the question and answer session. But before we do that, I want to say thank you so much for being an active participant today. Thank you for allowing me to come. It was my pleasure. Any questions? Yes. So I am. Mhm. Are you going to the same facility to get all of them? Yes. Sometimes if you don't go to the same facility, they are not inputting that information in there. So sometimes you can get emails from different providers that you're going to that says you're at different stages in the vaccines. So for example, I have clients that pop up and it says you're due for your vaccine. And they're like, I just went last week, but they didn't come into Atrium to get that. So it may say something different. As far as when you're due, I would definitely recommend you to contact your medical professional in order to get that information, because it just depends on when you had it and also the type that you had. And I can get you additional information on that too. I think she can provide more information because she's actually from the health department.
Yeah, so, and this is not even, I don't generally work in COVID, but we were just in another session the other day, and I just kind of heard this from one of the providers. So he said, right now, currently, the vaccine that is being provided is the bivalent vaccine. It's the one that targets the Omicron variants that are currently out, right? So the original vaccine that we all got in the beginning of the pandemic, that's no longer being given, okay? So the new vaccine targets the Omicron. So it's recommended that everyone get that vaccine, right? Because again, it covers you for all the current strains. Now, for somebody who has high risk factors, has any kind of immunocompromising illness or anything that's affecting their health that it's been recommended in the past that they get multiple boosters, then the recommendation is to try to get a booster around and now. So if you got one in last August, get one now. If you're not in that category of immunocompromised or having any kind of health risk factor, then it's probably okay to wait. Most likely in the fall, which is when we expect that cases may begin to rise again because everyone moves indoors again. Most likely there will be another version of the vaccine out, and at that point you can get the vaccine. So if you've already had one bivalent vaccine, you should be good unless you have some kind of immunocompromising condition, okay? But still, that's just sort of general information, general public. But please also consult with your provider if you have any additional questions.
Along the lines of what he's asking about how often you should have the repeat um, immunizations. Those who have the compromised immune systems, sometimes your caregiver will say, if you're having a procedure of some kind, you can't have that. So I've had some of those problems, and sometimes they said, well, you can't get anything else now. It depends on what you're on, sometimes your treatments. Because I had the first go around, I had all that. But it's like, no, you can't do that now. So that does affect, and should it be that way that it affects, just following your provider's
Yes, you should always follow your provider's suggestion, correct. Because if you are on a treatment that is temporarily reducing your defenses, then you don't want to introduce the vaccine, because the whole point of the vaccine is to activate your immune system. And if your immune system is actively being suppressed because you're under some kind of special treatment, then that's not going to work. Right? Because what the vaccine is going to do is going to activate your immune system. So that's the reason why sometimes they'll tell you to wait. Mm-hmm. So we're probably, yeah, so what she said was that it should probably be treated like the flu shot. And we're not there yet to make that recommendation, but we do believe that that's where we're headed. Great questions.
We have another question. So I had the first two, then the two boosters, but then in November I got the booster, super booster. So that means you're good.
You should be good.
Yeah.
You should be good, unless your provider recommends that you get a second one.
Yeah.
You should be good until the fall. In the fall, I definitely recommend that whenever that new vaccine comes out, that will target the new strains that are out, that you probably get another boost. Because again, everyone's going to move indoors again. We're going to start gathering, for the holidays and things like that. So you want to get that extra protection going into the holidays. Bivalent. Bivalent. Yes. Now, all of the vaccines that are out now are all going to be bivalent vaccines, so you don't need to remember that word. Yeah, those are the only vaccines that exist right now for COVID. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that fantastic information. Your questions were great. Thank you so much, Jessica. And I want to remind you just of a couple of things, that we need 5 volunteers to remain to talk. It takes about maybe 20 minutes. It's very, very short. Easy questions, no trick ones. For those of you who are, yes?
Sorry. Hi. I'm so sorry. Because of the delay, we missed a question from someone in the chat online.
Oh, okay, there's one more question. Good.
You up for it? Sure. All right. So our question is it safe to take the vaccine with other vaccines like the flu?
I'll let her answer that question from the health department.
So yes, so the recommendation actually is that you can get them at the same time, but again, talk to your provider and run it by them. But generally speaking, for most people, it is okay to get multiple vaccines at one time.
Okay, thank you so much. Just, you can raise your hands for maybe about 2 seconds from now if there's someone else online that has a question. Thank you for that. So I want to remind you about the 5 volunteers and the need to fill out the survey that helps us understand what it is you would like to see, how we've done today, because we really want to be able to meet your needs in the future. So in the chat, they're going to put a link for you to go and do that survey. And at this time, we are going to ask Jessica to come and talk about resources that are available through Mecklenburg County Public Health.
All right, hello again. So I was not able to actually show you the website, but we do have some slides, I believe, that my friends in the back are helping to pull up right now. But you may have noticed that when you came in, there were some resources on a table. Feel free to grab whatever you'd like. We have some at-home test kits. Grab whatever you need, and masks, and also some just information about COVID. And there we go, perfect. All right, so that's our website, and there's tons and tons of information there, resources for you. So that's our main page. And if you go to, actually, if you notice on the bottom right, there's a bot. And so if you click on that, you can ask any questions as well, and then the bot will direct you. So if you're looking for something specific, just type it in there, and it'll take you straight to where you want to go. But if we go to the next slide, basically it's that same page. You just go to the bottom, click on View Resources, and then that'll take you to the COVID-19 resources. And that's going to be where all your information is going to be. And then if you keep going down on that page, you'll come to this. And so you'll get information on vaccinations. So again, there's some resources in there about when to get vaccinated, what to expect, all that kind of stuff. There's some information about safety, so when to quarantine, or isolate, how long to wear a mask if you think you've been exposed, if you take an at-home test, and it comes out positive or it comes out negative, what should you do, what should your next steps be? All of those handouts are actually outside as well, but you can find them here if you ever need to reference them again. Testing and treatment, so when to test, and also the different treatment options. So you probably heard about there's some new treatment options out there, remdesivir and Paxlovid. So it tells you how many days after infection you can take that medication. So that's important information to have as well, because for a lot of people that medication can really reduce their symptoms if they tend to have really bad symptoms. And then there's assistance as well. And so some additional Atrium Health resources were shared today, but there is a flyer outside as well with some resources that the health department has partnered with for anybody who has any mental health needs. And next. community engagement. So if you continue scrolling down that page, you'll see that there's an online request form. And so if you are interested in any materials, test kits for your church, or for an event that's coming up or anything like that, you can request them here, okay? And a lot of times they'll come to you and bring it to you, or if they don't have the time or availability, then they may ask you to go to them. But everything that I got out there, you can get as well. Okay, so if you fill out this form, make the request, they'll get back to you and get that stuff for you. And then lastly, there's a phone number. So if all else fails, you can't get the answers that you need, you can always call the hotline and get some additional information on COVID. And that's all I have. Any questions? All right. Let's see. Do you have something to write with? Okay, so the,
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica, for showing us how to get to the resources that the county has available. And we want to thank again Pastor Farrow and the Reader Memorial Baptist Church for having us here so that we could discuss some things and share some things with you. And we look forward to having other village talks, not only here, but maybe at your church as well. Thank you so much for coming again, and good night, everyone.